and welcome to Crossing Channels. I'm Richard Westcott. How does migration change our world? That's the subject of the latest in our podcast collaboration between Cambridge University's Bennett Institute for Public Policy and the Institute for Advanced Study in Toulouse. As ever, we're going to use the interdisciplinary strengths of both institutions to explore a complex issue: how migration affects labour markets, legal protections and social cohesion, how economic incentives and border regimes shape who moves and why, and what smarter, fairer migration policies could look like in the years ahead. Well, to explore these issues today, we have Catherine Barnard from Cambridge University. Catherine, hello. Start us off. What does your research focus on?
So I have been looking at a town in East Anglia called Great Yarmouth, and I have been looking at the experience of EU migrant workers who came to Great Yarmouth in significant numbers, what their lives are like, what their accommodation is like, and what's their experience been at work. It once had a thriving tourism industry, and it's where Charles Dickens wrote part of David Copperfield. And now it's perhaps best known for having a former Reform MP, Rupert Lowe.
And joining us from the Toulouse School of Economics, we have Emmanuelle Auriol. Emmanuelle, remind us of your main research interests.
Well, I am an applied economist focusing on market failure, driven either by rent-seeking or cognitive biases and discriminatory norms. I combine theory and empirics to work on very applied topics, focus mainly on developing countries, and immigration is part of them.
Now, in today's world, migration is shaping economics, legal systems and societies in profound ways. In 2020, there were an estimated 281 million international migrants worldwide. That's around 3.6% of the global population. Migrants play vital roles in host countries. They fill labour shortages, they drive innovation and support essential sectors like care, agriculture and construction. At the same time, their arrival challenges how we think about national borders, rights and belonging, testing not just economic resilience, but also the legal systems that govern work, movement and integration. Today, we bring together two experts, one in law, one in economics, as you've just heard, to help us unpack these tensions and possibilities. Catherine, you've studied the lived realities of migrant workers in the UK post-Brexit. So from a legal perspective, how's the UK's shift in immigration policy affected the rights and everyday experiences of low-skilled EU and the non-EU migrants?
The migrant workers in Great Yarmouth came to the UK when we were still a member state of the EU, and they took advantage about the EU rules on free movement. And those rules entitled anyone who was economically active to come and work. And they're working in Great Yarmouth, mainly in chicken factories and also on farms, jobs, it must be said, that locals don't really want to do. And from what we can tell, the experiences that they are having have not been great. The difficulties of rights enforcement is very much the case. And in fact, although there are bodies that are meant to help enforce rights, like the Gangmasters Licensing and Abuse Authority, in reality, they are not getting into chicken factories. We're also seeing people suffering from working on 0 hours contracts. In the post-Brexit world, free movement has been turned off. Now the only migration routes are for high-skilled people. And so what you're seeing is that in chicken factories, they're still reliant on those who came prior to Brexit. What we're also seeing in the low-skilled sector is a number of people who have actually come here, possibly on small boats, possibly seeking asylum, who are not allowed to work pending their asylum claims, but in fact are working, and they're working as delivery drivers. And it's one of the things that the government at the moment is doing, is to try and clamp down on those who are working in the gig economy who shouldn't be working at all. But the current government, and indeed the previous government's immigration policy, has been focusing on high-skilled workers, although high-skilled is actually a relative concept. Some people say that outside the EU, the UK currently has the most liberal immigration regime. In fact, you only really need to have A-level qualifications to be able to come. But in reality, there are still really big shortages in the so-called low-skilled sector, also in respect to social care. But in respect to social care, there is a special visa. What you see is, if you look at the data, it's probably about 1 in 10 in the broader Great Yarmouth region are EU migrant workers, mainly from Portugal, Poland, Lithuania and Latvia, but in more recent years, Bulgaria, and perhaps the largest number now is in fact from Romania. Now, the argument is that they have come, and for the local people, they say their town is no longer the same. If you just look at the data for those who are living right in the centre of town, it's probably 1 in 4 of the population. And Great Yarmouth had the 5th highest vote to leave in the Brexit referendum. And they obviously hoped that their lives would be better following Brexit. In fact, there hasn't been much sign of it. There's still a lot of EU migrant workers. Somewhat surprisingly, despite the conditions of work, they haven't gone back to their home countries. That's perhaps not so surprising. Some have been there for a long period of time, but others are Roma Romanians and Roma Bulgarians, and they still think they're treated better in the UK than they would be in their own home country.
Emmanuelle, migration must be the hottest topic politically in most of the world today, actually. Certainly in Europe and in the US. It's determining the outcome of elections. We hear it's a problem. We hear it's a solution. What does your research tell us?
Well, first of all, I would like to come back a bit on the descriptive statistic you gave at the beginning, because you said that 3.45% of the population, of the world population, is migrant. But if you look at that, 90% or more than 90% of immigrants are economic migrants. So what I mean by that, they are either moving to work or they are moving to study, so to build their human capital. And if you do that, of course, you don't go randomly on the planet. You select country where the higher education system is working well and where the prospect to find a well-paid job are higher. And that's mean that in advanced economy, the percentage of immigrant is much higher than 3.5%. It's more than 10%. So it's 12%. They focus. They are not going to a very deprived country, of course. So now the second question is it good or bad? And it's a fair question, I think. We should be able to address it and to discuss it. If rich country host immigrant, are there making a generous gesture and giving away things, or on the contrary, are they benefiting from it? And from a purely economic point of view, these migrants that are coming for economic reason, and they are the vast majority of immigration on the planet, they are contributing positively to the economy of countries that host them. So why? First of all, these immigrants, they are not random people. If you choose to go on migration for economic reasons, so either to build your human capital or to work, you must have in you this appetite for risk. Immigrants, on average, are more able to take risk than average people from their community. And this type of skill we cannot really explore in school. It's very hard. We are not going to put kids in dangerous situations to see which one is the most willing to take risk. And so because of that, of course, these people that come to advanced economy, especially if there are skills, I'm a bit in contradiction with Catherine, or at least I don't want to defend the policy of the UK, but focusing on high skill immigration as a benefit. And so this high skill migrant, if you look, for instance, at the US, you have like 13% of the population that is immigrant, official immigrant. And if you look now at the number of patents and of new firms that are created with an immigrant at their board, it's 25%. So they are overrepresented among those who create firms and those that are innovative, because they have this not only skills, but they are also able to take risk, which is crucial for both type of work. Finally, this migrant, they bring something else to an economy, which is the fact that they are going to do trade with their home country. So they increase internal and external trade, which is very good for the host country. So if you add together innovation, creation of firms, plus trade, you will understand why economists in general think immigration is a very good thing, especially high-skilled one, but also low-skilled one.
Now let's talk about the individual person. So I'm interested, what does the evidence say about how migration impacts wages for local people? Because there's always this narrative, this sense that local people don't get paid as much because the migrants will will work for less money.
So first of all, it's very, very hard to find negative impact of immigration on the economy, because especially if immigration is relatively easy, because it's pro-cyclical. So if you have a growth, immigrant will come to work, and if there is no growth, nothing to do, they will stay at home. I remind you, they don't come for tourism; they come to make money. So they want to find a job. So what we know from very clean microeconomic study is that it tends to displace the last migrants that arrived before them. Okay, so you might be in competition with these people, but for the local people, what happens is that in general, the immigrant will get the worst job. And so if you are working in a restaurant, you will clean the plate in the kitchen, and the local will serve the food. That's the type of displacement they have. So when you have immigration coming in, low-skill immigration, what happens for the local in general, they get a promotion. I mean, they are in better job. We see a lot of prejudice, and these prejudices are shared with by owner of firms, of course. So don't think they will be more open to immigration because they are the owner of a firm. No, they are not. And so they use immigrant when they think it's useful for them, but they will prefer to have natives most of the time. So that's the type of result we have. So it's hard, honestly, to find negative impact. Some studies, they even include the fact that some migrants are, for instance, put in jail more than natives in certain type of category. But even when we had jail and we had everything, it's really, really hard to find in the short run a strong negative impact of immigration on the economy.
Catherine, you want to come in here?
Yeah, should I just come on off the back of that? It's really good to hear an economist talk on the basis of knowledge. Certainly, there is very little evidence in the UK data that migrant workers were undermining or undercutting local wages. Possibly for the very lowest paid, there was some evidence of some downward pressure on wages. The reality is it's perception rather than what's actually going on. And the perception is very strong that there is wage undercutting. Now, the truth of the matter is what we see in Yarmouth is, of course, the migrants are doing jobs that British people don't want to do. The other issue is that because the work they're doing is low paid, they get benefits, tax credits to supplement their low pay. And so what you see is the narrative developing that migrants are not only taking our jobs, but also taking our benefits. And that's because they were doing these low paid jobs, which need to be supplemented with credits because often they've got young children and so need help. But nevertheless, it's that creates the resentment, and it's that you see leading to the pushback against migration, despite the fact that often migrants are doing jobs which local people don't want to take up.
I'm interested, Catherine, when you speak to migrants in this country and local people as well, is there a sense of migrants in one corner, local people in another corner, or are there different kinds of migrants? Do migrants sort of feel that other migrants might be usurping them or taking advantage? What's the dynamic there?
First of all, we see that in Yarmouth, some of the most disadvantaged wards, as they're called, areas, are lived in by migrant workers, and they're living mainly in HMOs, houses of multiple occupation. Essentially, it's seen almost as a no-go area by the locals. It's very striking. We've been working on one particular street, and interestingly, some of the locals say they have never, ever gone on this street. They say it's dangerous and they're likely to be attacked. I should say, I, as a white woman, walk up and down that street all the time, and I've never, ever felt in any way threatened. So you see a divided community. Where there's some more optimistic signs is that, of course, the children go to local schools and they start to mix. What becomes more complicated is that although we think about EU migration as white migration, in fact, there is quite considerable numbers of people from Africa and Asia who hold Portuguese passports. So they come from Angola, Mozambique, Brazil. And so they've enjoyed free movement rights. But we have stories of really quite serious racism against the non-white EU migrant workers. And then within the migrant group, yes, there is a pecking order, and the pecking order has those who've been there the longest, Portuguese nationals at the top, and at the bottom there is the Roma Romanians and Roma Bulgarians. So yes, it's a more complex picture than you might expect.
Now, let's talk a little bit about the system that's in place at the moment. Emmanuelle, you've proposed fee-based visa systems to allocate permits more efficiently. How would a system like that work in practice, and what safeguards would be needed to ensure it remains fair and ethical?
So I looked at both skill and unskilled immigration, but let's talk about unskilled immigration because Catherine discussed that more. Okay, you need relatively unskilled labor. You have needs, for instance, at least in a country like France, in restaurant, which is a very touristic country, in Paris, 30% of the workers are immigrant. So if you get rid of these people, then the economy collapse. In some job, it's go up to 60%. So we need immigrant and skilled immigrant to do many things that matter for our economy. Hospitality, but also security. So that's a paradox for those that claim that immigration is a threat to security. When you look at where unskilled immigrants work, they work in security massively. You see them in airport, you see them patrolling shops, etc. So you need really this workforce. So what is the equilibrium here? The political platform, we have populism, and people blame immigration for many things that are not really immigration, that can be, for instance, technological progress that displace unqualified or unskilled job, etc. So you have other things going on at the same time as immigration, but they blame immigration for instance, the destruction of work in industry. And it's very, very hard when you are a politician to come and say, okay, we are going to regulate immigration, to give visa, so we can fill the positions that are open in our country. And so what is the status quo? They pretend to be very tough on immigration. I'm going to build a wall, I'm going to kick them out, etc., etc. The Brexit is a bit also a testimony to that. But then the jobs are unfilled and still unfilled. So you let people come undocumented. It's very costly for them. They have to pay a smuggler. It's very dangerous. If they try the cheap route, they can end up drowning in the Mediterranean Sea if they come from Africa, for instance. So, and if they come with the expensive route, they are in debt with very bad people. So they have to be slave for a long time. So all these things, and so in the end, you have undocumented migration. The jobs are filled by sometimes employers that exploit them. And it's a very, very bad equilibrium because the voters, they say, oh, you say you are very tough on immigration, but there are all these people coming anyway. So I want to vote for someone that will really be tough on them. And Trump is, for instance, an example of that because he's very tough on immigration. He was elected for that. He say, I will build a wall. But in the same time, he never, ever condemned a firm for employing an immigrant, especially in California, where you have only Mexican picking fruit and vegetable. So if you are really willing to cut immigration, there is one very simple way, is to cut job for undocumented worker. Countries that do not have this type of work available, they don't have illegal immigration. Okay? Because it's the pull factor is to work. So my proposal is to improve the situation by having workers offered visa for a short-term period for those unskilled positions, exactly like it exists, for instance, in Canada. And so you offer contract of visa that is short-term for 2 years, maybe. They come legally, they pay a fee. Why the fee? Because, and usually it's the employer who pays the fee, it's to avoid the idea that they are going to take the job of local people. So if it costs something to make them come, people will understand that in priority I will take a UK citizen or a French citizen where there is not such a fee. And that's something that works. So, for instance, in France, that's the paradox. We save our clementine, so it's like orange, in Corsica during the COVID by bringing people from Morocco with a temporary visa. They pick the orange, they go back, they are well paid, they don't risk their life. It's much better much better than the status quo.
So, Catherine, obviously we've had Brexit and the UK moved from free movement to a points-based immigration system. But what have been the consequences of all of that on the ground, as it were?
Well, it's really striking, of course, since the UK left the EU, the levels of immigration have gone up dramatically. And indeed, the figures for last year were the best part of 1 million came to the UK. And of course, at one level, this is very good for the UK economy because you're bringing in often young people who want to work. But of course, it doesn't address the problem that the reason why a lot of people voted for Brexit was to try to control immigration. And of course, the arrival of small boats coming from France into the UK is the most visible and concrete signs that the UK government has not got a grip on the immigration issue. Meanwhile, in respect of the low-skilled, what you're seeing is the use of seasonal work visas. And in the past, those who used to come and pick fruit in British farms were from Central Eastern Europe, i.e. they came as free movers under EU law. What you're seeing now is that there are a limited number of agencies who can provide workers, and they are often going to look for workers from Uzbekistan, from Nepal, and they come for a short period of time. Now, the argument is that they risk being exploited because they are tied to particular employers. In fact, there has been some relaxation of this. And some of the interview work that we have done suggests that actually, because it's so expensive to bring people over on these seasonal work visas, that you actually need to look after them well, one, to encourage them to come, and two, to make sure they stay. And also, of course, lots of other countries are trying to get people to come on seasonal work visas to do low-skilled work. And therefore, they have quite a choice as to where they want to go. And so if the UK has got a reputation for exploiting those coming on seasonal work visas, then they just won't come. And the government has now got a grip because it uses only a certain number of agencies who are approved. And if there's evidence of abuse, then the agency gets delisted, and therefore they can no longer bring workers in. So the stories of abuse that we've heard of in the past are reduced for these reasons. Of course, it's not perfect because you're working in rural areas, but it is better than it was before.
Now, we always like to finish by gazing into the future a little bit. So climate change, ageing populations, technological disruption, they're all going to drive future migration. What do you each see as the most urgent priorities, legal or economic, for building sustainable migration systems for the future? We'll start with you, Emmanuelle.
Well, I think that we need to organize things. This is a market that is not organized. There is a demand, there is an offer, and nothing in the middle. Okay, these people either they manage to come by themselves. It's very dangerous, and that's true that you can have some exploitation of immigrant with legal visa, but you have far more protection when you are legal than when you are not, and that's a definitive point. I think we should have that very clear in our mind. So, I am for legalization of immigration of this work permit. You do that right, so people come with a plane or with a boat, they don't risk their life, you diminish organized crime, and you make the competition with local worker fair because you pay everything, all the taxes you are supposed to pay when you have an immigrant that is here legally. So politically, I think it's difficult to sell, but it's possible. Look at Australia. Australia was extremely close to immigration, extremely defensive for years and decades, and it changed totally its way of doing things. So it's an island, that's true, but still it has opened to immigration, and now I think the economy is booming, is much better than before, and that's related to this policy. So it's possible. It's not impossible to imagine a world where immigration will be regulated and will be safe and will be profitable for both sides. I speak about economic regulation. Of course, I don't speak about refugees. That's a totally different story.
And Catherine, where do you see the urgent priorities?
There's got to be more legal routes for migration, because at the moment what you're seeing is that there are so few legal routes for people to come. Therefore, they have to get onto small boats and thus are in the hands of smugglers. And essentially they're coming as economic migrants, but because there's no legal economic route for them to come, therefore they then have to claim asylum, which of course clogs up the asylum system, and it was never what the asylum system was intended for. And yet for many people, for example, coming from Afghanistan, Iraq, these war-torn countries, these failed states, of course you understand why people want to get out. And they want to come to the West because they see that they've got opportunities there. And so there needs to be a marrying, as Emmanuelle said, between the demand and the need. Now, what is interesting, if you just look at the data, generally British people are not opposed to migration. Indeed, actually, post-Brexit, attitudes towards immigration have become much more favourable. What they are opposed to is a sense of lack of control. And if there was a way of showing that migration is controlled and is managed, then it looks like the public will accept that. One other point to note, which we haven't mentioned, is fertility rates. There is a declining fertility rate right across Europe, including in the UK. And in fact, we all need young people to come in to work, to pay taxes, to pay for our pensions, and to care for us in our care homes. So migration is going to be an issue, not just now, but going forward.
Well, that's all we have time for in this episode. Thanks so much to Catherine Barnard from Cambridge University and Emmanuelle Auriol from Toulouse School of Economics. Now, let us know what you think of this latest episode of Season 4 of Crossing Channels. If you enjoyed it, then do leave us a review. It helps us shape future episodes and it helps people to find us as well, so we do appreciate it. That is actually it for this season of Crossing Channels, and what a season it's been. We've tackled such a broad range of questions. Is children's mental health getting worse? Do prisons work? How is data changing our lives? Why do we choose what we choose? Will Europe ever catch up with the US in technology? What's the value of speaking other languages? They're all there to listen to. I've learned so much in this past season, and we'll be back with a brand new 5th season starting in October. Until then, goodbye.